Salute is a program for and about men and women who have served our country. Our program includes news about the laws that affect veterans, information on benefits and services, and news from veterans organizations. And now, our host, Bob Peters.
Hello and welcome to Salute. I'm Bob Peters, your host. Before I introduce my guest today, I'd like to mention about this article that was in the newspaper, and I give a shout out and a heads up to the kids in Leesburg and Sandy Hutchins, who organized the kids, and they put together these boxes to be sent overseas to the troops. And we're talking kids that were 8 to 11, put together the boxes. Pictures were colored by children, 2, 3, and 4-year-olds, and then the teens in the high school and other schools around here, they all put together the packages, so it was a big team effort, and we salute you guys for that. Okay, my guest is a gentleman who's been on the show before, a friend of mine, who is with SOS, Support Our Soldiers, Gary Kadow, and welcome to the show, sir. Kadow.
That's all right. It's early.
Yeah, it's early. Gary just put together these medical supplies, and why don't you tell people a little bit about SOS, and I'm going to hold this picture up here so they can see what's being shipped out.
Sure, I'd be happy to. Project SOS Support Our Soldiers started about a year ago, and it was just an idea that I had come up with where I had talked to local hospitals and found out that there were a great many healthcare and medical and surgical supplies that had to be disposed of once they were done in patients' rooms and in operating theaters. They ended up in a landfill. So I had talked to the hospital about the possibility of getting these supplies, having them disinfected, sanitized, and repackaged, and sending them over to our troops both in Iraq and Afghanistan. And they were very receptive to the idea. It began in the Villages Hospital, and we connected it with the local Rotary Club there. And from that point, we started sending 4 and 5 boxes. In the beginning, we would ship them directly over to a medical battalion located in Bakuba, Iraq, to be used by our soldiers, and also to be used for humanitarian missions that they carry out over there, which many people don't realize. We have the greatest combat troops in the world.
Oh, definitely.
But we also have the greatest humanitarians in the world, and the U.S. Army Rangers there make a point of going out to these villages and helping, especially the children and the civilians that were caught in the crossfire of war. So we try and support that effort by sending it. And as I said, 5 or 6 cartons were being sent back then. And now, 1 year later, last week, a week ago Wednesday, we shipped out 6 tons of medical and surgical supplies, including wheelchairs for the children and vitamins for the children, infant medications, all kinds of surgical equipment to our troops to be used both in Iraq and Afghanistan. And as we speak, they're on their way right now. So we're very proud of that. We're very pleased that so many people came through, particularly the people in the Villages area, the Leesburg area, throughout Lake County, Sumter County. They really came forward and they really pitched in, and they made it all possible. I mean, we can organize the effort, but without their support, it doesn't happen. And the generosity here is just amazing in this area. So we're very pleased, and we thank all the people out there for that.
Well, kudos to you and your staff and everybody. You don't realize
Thank
you
you.
were like the second show we did here on Salute.
Oh, is that right?
And when I saw a little article in the newspaper, needed wheelchairs.
Yeah?
Called you up, and in fact, I gave you my mother's old chair.
I remember.
And I asked you to come on the show, and
Yeah.
it's good to see that it's prospered so well.
We needed 11 wheelchairs, and in 2 weeks we got 160.
Yeah, that's
It's
great.
just amazing.
It makes me feel good.
What a
too.
community. It's an amazing community.
You got a lot of nice press lately, too. I got to understand there was another article that went out there. And
We did. We've had wonderful press from Leesburg, from the commercial. We got a full-page ad regarding Project SOS and what we're doing in Daily Sun last Monday, which was, I was really thankful to see that. It went out to almost 80,000 people in the area. We've also had coverage as far as Orlando. The Orlando Sentinel has done a wonderful job. So the media has been wonderful in supporting this effort, as have the people, and we're very pleased with that.
Has his Lakefront TV.
We are, and we're continuing to grow. Leesburg now is a big part. We have the Leesburg Regional Medical Center. And
Yeah, you met with them the day we did our show.
Exactly, and they came on board with us, and they're working directly now with the Rotary Club, the afternoon club, the lunch club here in Leesburg, and they're doing a fantastic job. And a couple of weeks ago, I was honored to meet with the Rotary Clubs of Tavares, Eustis, and Mount Dora, they've come on board with Project SOS, and we've also signed the Florida Hospital at Waterman. Ken Madison, who's the president there, meeting with them next Tuesday, and they're coming on board with us too. So we're starting to grow, we're starting to expand across Central Florida.
That's great.
And that's very gratifying.
Yes, it certainly is. Yeah. Well, when you first came on the show, we had a conversation a little bit about September 11th.
We did.
And I asked you if you would come back because you were very much part of the relief effort for September 11th, and you wrote a book that I'd like to hold up here, 10 Days of Hell and Heroes. I read the book, and I tell you, it really blew my mind because the stories in there opens your eyes to really what went on, and so I'm glad to have you on the show. Maybe you'd like to tell us a little bit how this book got started and your partner who helped you write it.
Sure. Basically what the book is, it's not what you would call a literary masterpiece, but what it is it's a journal. I worked, after I finished my regular vocation with the federal government, I decided to get back involved in the community and give back a little, so I volunteered with the American Red Cross. And in doing so, I received a call from Washington, and I was asked if I would serve as one of the national government liaison officers for the Red Cross in responding to disasters, being on a first-string mobility team. So I ended up being shipped out to floods and hurricane areas, forest fires all over the United States. And on the morning of September 11th, I was asked to go down to the World Trade Center. While I was down there in any disaster, I always kept a daily journal of what my thoughts, what my emotions were, what I saw, and what people were going through. This particular time, I had just been given a camera by my wife for my birthday, which was 31st of August, so it wasn't too far in advance of September 11th. And I happened to throw that in my bag and take it with me, a little digital camera. Never used it before in my life. And when I arrived there, I continued to do what I had done with other disasters, and every night when I would get a chance, even a few minutes, which is basically all I had, I would sit and I would write my thoughts and what I saw and what I felt and what moved me. At the same time, I would ask permission to take pictures, tying it in with those particular feelings and bringing them together. Once I got back, it was a very, very difficult time after being there and seeing what I saw. I went through a very, very long period where I couldn't read the journal and I couldn't look at the pictures. And after about a year, talking to a friend of mine who is the co-author of the book on this, was Steve, who was my attorney, and also other people, therapists and people that were specialists in trauma therapy, I was finally able to look at the pictures again, to read the journal. And at that point, Steve Fox, who I had mentioned as the co-author, said, you know, you really need to share this with other people. And my thoughts originally were I was just doing this to share with my future grandchildren. At the time I didn't have any, now I have a new little boy. But my intent was not to share it publicly, it was personal to me. And he told me I was probably the most selfish guy I ever met. And when I asked him why, he said that's exactly why. He said people need to know what it was really like, what was happening at Ground Zero, what went on down there in what we affectionately called the pit, where journalists and media weren't allowed to go, but that's where we worked every day. So at that point, I talked to him, we collaborated. He's a wonderful writer. He worked with me on the book, and we came out with it about a year later. And it's been out now for about 8 years. We don't sell the book through any of the bookstores. It's not available that way, because when you do that, a sizable percentage has to go for them in order to carry it. And we decided early on that if we were going to do this, every penny that we get from the book would go to charity. So each year, the money comes through me, I keep it in an account, and I donate that to charity. And we've supported Operation Shoebox. We've supported various charities in the area, including the Red Cross. A lot of the money has gone to the 9/11 Memorial, which is being constructed now, which I feel very strongly about, which is where the money would go this year. And we're continuing to do that. So if people are looking to get a copy of the book, unfortunately the only place they can get it is through me, by writing me directly and asking for it, and then I will send it out to them. So.
Well, you can give a little plug out there. Where would they and how much?
The book sells for $20. If it's going to be mailed to you, it's an additional $4, so it's $24. We take checks or money order. It's payable to the author, to myself, Gary Kadow, and they would mail that to 2412 Due West Drive. That's D-U-E, and then West Drive in the Villages, and it's 32162. Once I get that, then I will take the book and I mail it directly out to them. and I sign every book that I send out. I write an inscription there, and I sign it in appreciation for them caring enough to want to have a copy of it.
Yeah, well, I got my copy.
Yes, you do.
I'll tell you, part of why I do this show is because everybody has a story, and then there's like a lot of the World War II guys, a part of the greatest part of history. If they don't spread their story and tell people, no one will ever hear them, and no one will ever learn, and no one will ever appreciate. So that's why I think what you're doing is what should have been done too.
Thank you.
So let's move on with that. I don't want to. You got some photos there. Let's start with that first one you got.
Yeah, actually, the first photo. This is how I arrived at 9/11. When I got the call early in the morning after the first plane hit, and I was told to grab my bag, which I always have available and ready to go. I was told I was going to Albany, New York, which I did, which was the command center, the command bunker center underneath the State University of Albany, about 350 feet underground, is a command center where the governor goes and his people. And when I arrived there, communications was probably the biggest issue we had. We were not getting accurate information from Ground Zero, mainly because the tower that came down was one of the main lines of communication. That's where the major antennas were, not only to us in Albany, but also to the firefighters and the police. As you recall, a lot of their radios ceased to work that day, and that's why. So I was asked by the governor, Governor Pataki at the time, to go down to Ground Zero and do an on-site assessment, which I did as a government liaison officer. And this is how I arrived in my Red Cross garb. When I got down there, I immediately went through, and I can remember walking through ashes above my knees with a young captain who was taking me back in to meet with the gentleman who was in charge of the command center there at the towers, at the base of the towers. And as I was walking through the ashes, I remembered meetings I used to go to down there at the towers, being a federal officer. I went there quite often, and I had said to him, my God, I said, there's 30,000 people in these towers. I said, where are they? You know, kind of a naive question, and he looked at me with a solemn look, and he said, we're walking through them, pal. He says, you're breathing them right now. And then reality hit me that this is all that was left. Most of the people that were in the immediate area, the immediate floors where the planes hit, were incinerated immediately. Those that were in there when the towers came down, unfortunately received an equal fate. So there was very little left, although when the rain came a little later in the day and the ashes started to clear and they started running down some of the sewers in the street and so forth, we saw the remains. And I can honestly say I don't think there was a square yard that I looked at that there wasn't a remnant of some human being who had been lost in the towers and the other buildings that came down. Again, we talk about the towers a lot, but there were actually 23 buildings that were affected in the entire center. It was the size of 16 football fields. That's how immense this was. So when I arrived, this is how I arrived. And as I got to the commander, my immediate question is always the same. What do you need to have right now? What are your immediate needs that we can get you? And the response just knocked me over. He came back and he said, I need a chaplain. And I got a bewildered look and I said, a chaplain? And he said, you don't understand. He said, Father Judge, Michael Judge, he said, he's our chaplain. And he said, he's dead. He was the first one to die. He was death certificate 1 in the tower. And he said, if you think I'm going to send my people into that pit of hell without at least having the benefit of the sacrament of the church, he said, you're crazy, because I know some of them aren't going to be coming out again. And
Father Mike was giving a last rites, right? Something came down and hit him?
As it turns out, we found out much later, we weren't quite sure. There were rumors around that he was hit, that something came down. I mean, there were situations where people were panicked and they were jumping from the towers at the time. That's no secret, and there's film of that. But that's not how he died. He died of a heart attack. He was always first one in. He was loved by both the NYPD and by the fire department. He's one of the few that could bridge that gap, because there was always a friendly rivalry. But Father Michael was just an amazing man, and anytime they had to go in mass like they did that day, he was right in the front. He was the first guy to run up that escalator and into that tower. And he was not a young man. So as it turned out, the last I had heard in talking to some of the people that I still stay in touch with down there, his heart gave out, and that's how he died. But no, he was not hit.
Oh, okay.
That's never been proven. So that was a rumor that went around for a long time.
That's what I heard. So I didn't.
Yeah. No, he died. His heart gave out. He gave all that he could. He gave full measure and was not destined to get through that. So at the time I was told that, I was, as I said, set back, kind of shocked by it, and my response just blurted out, and I looked at him and I said, well, I'm a chaplain. That's what I do. I've been a chaplain for 26 years, and I have. I'm an emergency chaplain. You know, I've worked disasters. I'm an Episcopal chaplain. I went through the training in seminary and so forth. And I had not practiced in a long time because I was involved in other things with the government. And he looked at me when I told him that, and he shook my hand. He said, welcome aboard, Father. You're my new chaplain. And I said, it doesn't quite work that way. I said, I have to make a phone call. And I did, and I called back to the governor's group. I didn't get him directly, but I got his assistant, and I explained the situation. And I said, look, I'm down here. And I said, there's an immediate need. I said, they need a chaplain here right now. I said, you have no idea what this scene is like. And I said, I'd like to stay here with your permission. And the answer was, no, you can't, which kind of shocked me. And I said, well, why? I said, why on earth couldn't I stay here? This is where I'm needed. This is what I would like to do. And they said, because we brought you in for a specific purpose, and you need to fulfill that purpose. We don't have anybody else here that can do that. And my job mainly was to coordinate the relief effort between all the government agencies, be it federal, state, county, local. It didn't matter, to make sure we weren't duplicating effort, and also to make sure that what we did need got through. So it was an important job, and I needed to be there and do my 8 hours underground in Albany. So I said to them, do you care what I do on my own time? And they said, we don't care what you do on your own time, as long as you do what we need you to do here. And I said, great. So I got back on the train at Penn Station. I went back up to Albany and went back down. I did my work. I did it well. Everyone was pleased, and I didn't hold back on anything. We got it done. But the minute I finished, instead of going back and getting some sleep or going to the hotel or wherever we were happening to be staying at the time, I got back on the train. And I would take the 2-hour ride down to Penn Station. Meanwhile, I arranged to have NYPD pick me up at the station. I would climb in the back of the squad car, and if you've never been in the back of a squad car, and I hope you never have, there's not a whole lot of room in that cage. Yeah. So I would be coming out of this, and I was changing into this, because I brought my clerical garb with me also. At the same time, and obviously I did so because someone else spoke to my heart. Early when I left, I also brought my field communion kit with me, so I had everything that I needed to actually hold communion services there at Ground Zero. And that's what I would do every day. I would work my 8 hours in Albany. I would take the train, ride with NYPD, go to Ground Zero, and I would work 10 hours there, and then take the train back and do it all over again. So the only sleep I really got was the 2 hours on the train, which sounds good in theory, but as you get on the train and you have a hard hat and you're covered in ashes, and even though you're wearing a collar or you're wearing Red Cross, either way, depending which way I was going, people would see the gas mask around your neck and all that, and they'd say, oh, have you been there? And yes, and of course then the questions all came. Well, yeah. I have a family member there, I have a wife, I have a sister, I have a cousin, and you can't say no. You need to talk to them. And that's what I spent most of the train ride doing. I got very, very little sleep. If I was lucky, when I was at Ground Zero, I could lay down on a shelf somewhere in a blown-out building and maybe catch a half hour or an hour sleep, and that was it. So it was quite busy. We did 3 services a day right down in the pit. And whenever they would find someone or remains, I had a radio, and I would get a call. And we would go down. If it was a police officer, police officers would go down with me. If it was a firefighter, they would escort me down. If it was Port Authority, New York, New Jersey Port Authority, who lost a lot of people also that day, their people would go down. And my purpose in going down was to administer the sacraments of the church and anoint the body or the remains, whatever the case would be. In most cases it was remains. Place them in a body bag and then bring them out. But it was always done with great dignity and respect. And everyone that we recovered down there, everyone that came out, was afforded the sacraments of the church. That was a tough haul. I made that trip all too many times.
Yeah, and you've made a lot of acquaintances down there that you'll remember always, and they will always remember you. Yeah. They gave you a little name tag.
They did. They did.
Tell us what the name tag said.
Well, being down in the New York, New Jersey area, instead of Father Gary, it was Fodder. So that got to be the standing joke, and I had a name tag.
Because you're a minister, not a priest.
That's correct. It's not father, it's chaplain.
Yeah, it's
right.
chaplain.
That's correct.
But they nicknamed you
But
Father.
down there, the minute they saw the collar, and they knew what we were doing, and they would gather. We would have services when they went down, and we would give thanks when they came out. It was Father. but in their case it was fodder. So whenever they needed was, hey, fodder Gary. And they made a little tag, and it was spelled fodder, F-A-D-D-E-R, fodder Gary. So I wore that when I was down there.
The donations, I was reading in your book about the donations. The gloves and the hats and the batteries and stuff like that you needed. I remember that because I worked for Northeast Utilities, and Northeast Utilities sent down a bunch of gloves and hard hats and everything. But there was another one, some of the stuff you needed. How about telling us a little bit about that, especially about a crane?
Yeah, that was interesting. Obviously, because of the conditions down there, the steel was really an impediment in trying to find out if somebody was still in there. You had to cut through an awful lot of steel. And they were down there with torches, and there were so many people involved down there. So many iron workers were down there working, giving their time, along with other people in construction. I mean, they get very little recognition. That's part of why I wrote the book, to recognize all those who haven't been recognized. But in being down there, we needed heavy equipment. We needed cranes to get some of that out of there, and you had to be very careful because, again, in moving it, you could also do damage if somebody was underneath there. So we needed specialized cranes to do that. And in one particular case, there was a gentleman who was having one sent over from, I can't remember the exact country because I haven't read the book in a little while.
It said Canada, but I read.
Well, it was going to go to Toronto. That was the end result. But it was coming over from Europe, and it was just about here. And instead of heading up north to the Canadian area, he volunteered it and he offered it to New York City, and they diverted it and they brought it into New York and they brought it over to the site. But that was one of many things that took place. We had people that sent cameras in from Japan, specialized cameras on lines with robotic cameras that could go down underground and search to try and find it, see if anybody was still alive under there. Just some amazing technology that was given to us free of charge to use in this rescue effort. Everyone stepped forward, from the youngest person to the oldest person. There was a lady that I'll never forget. We had a lot of dogs down there. They called them cadaver dogs, which we didn't particularly like that term because we weren't looking for bodies. We were looking for people to be rescued. And they would go in and they would run through the rubble. And the piles of rubble down there had shards of steel and glass embedded in the concrete because of the heat. It would literally bake it in. And the first day I was down there, on the 11th, that evening they lost 2 dogs, and what had happened is their paws had been cut to shreds in running through the debris because they're trained to do that. They'll run to where the scent is, where the body is, with no regard for themselves, and their pads and their paws got cut to ribbons, and one dog bled out, the other one died of sheer exhaustion. And the word got out on that in the immediate area, and there was a little lady named Ruth Sisson, who was 82 years old, lived in Soho. She had heard about it. And she came in the next morning and she had sat up all night knitting little red corduroy boots with Velcro on them for the dogs. And she brought about 100 pair of these to us. And
she did a lot of knitting.
Oh, it's amazing. Well, she was sewing them on her machine. I guess it wasn't knitting. It's not my thing. But she made these boots for the dogs, and I've got pictures of the dogs down there with these red boots. They didn't like them. We had to stick them on because they'd tear them off. But it saved them. And then within 48 hours, a gentleman who had a manufacturing company in California who makes these wire mesh net tubes that you can put on the end of your washing machine hose to catch the lint. He retooled within 24 hours and made smaller, shorter ones with pulls on them for the dogs, and sent about 1,000 pair of those to us too. So anything we needed, somebody was out there to provide it. It was just incredible. Incredible.
Yeah. What was the story with the bronze statue? I thought that was interesting.
Yeah, it was. When you're in a situation like that and you're surrounded by such tremendous devastation and so much heartache, you look for little things to try and smile at, that maybe you can get a little bit of humor out of it to make it through the day. And one of the things that came up, and it didn't start off humorous, but it did end that way. We had gotten a call, and we were down there, one of the rescue units, one of the fire units, had gotten a call that there was a body that was hanging out of a window about 4 stories up and about 3 blocks down in a building. And that was not unusual. I mean, when these towers came down, the force, the immense force, was just beyond belief. And we did find remains, as far away as 10 blocks on rooftops.
Wow.
So they dispatched a unit to go down, and a bunch of the firefighters went down there, and they went up into the building, and they came back shortly after that to recover this body that was half hanging out of the window. And when they came back and we saw what it wasn't a body at all. It was a statue, a bronze statue of a man in a business suit with a briefcase that had been bolted to a bench right there in the reflection pool area between the towers. When the force came down it literally tore this bronze statue, the bolts out off the bench, and threw it 3 blocks away, 4 stories up, and it was sticking in the window. And this is what they saw. So as they came back, they were marching with this statue up on their shoulders. And you know, we got a little bit of a laugh out of that, and we set it up in our staging area, and it became a memorial. And everybody would go by, would write a poem, put a flag on, take one of their patches, place it, and after a while, it got to be quite an interesting sight, quite a beautiful sight with the words that were written and so forth. And that kind of became our own on-site memorial that we had there for all the rescue workers that were working there day and night.
Tell us, the people, a little bit about the construction of the building that actually imploded, and tell them why that is. And
I found out later, the way the building came down was most unusual, and when you see the photos and the videos of it, the building is literally imploding upon itself. It's coming straight down, and that's exactly the way it was designed. It was supposed to go that way because of the size and because of the complex that it was located in. The last thing they wanted to do was fall side to side and do more damage. Now, when they designed it, and it kind of brought up several questions. One of the biggest questions was, why didn't we find anything that was still intact? I mean, we didn't find any human beings that were intact, very few, unless they were on the bottom floors. We didn't find desks, we didn't find chairs, computer monitors, nothing. Everything was just shattered to finite pieces. And in understanding why that was, the construction sort of explained it. I talked to a gentleman who was with FEMA, who actually was an engineer, and he told me that when the building was constructed, there really were no center beams, no center support beams, bearing beams in it. It was all the outside walls, and they were connected by steel cables, twisted cables, probably about 6 inches thick if I remember right. And they connected to the outside walls and were embedded in the concrete floors. About every 2 to 3 feet there would be a cable running through. That's what held the floor, that's what held the walls in. So as the building came down and one floor collapsed on the other, the walls pushed out, the cables snapped and began to unwind in the concrete and literally blew it up, the same as if you had a row of grenades all going off at the same time. It pulverized everything that was in its path and then imploded down on the next floor and did the same thing in the next floor, and that's why you saw it come straight down. In fact, the antenna on top of the main tower that came down literally came down like an arrow and stuck in the ground, and it was 51 feet embedded into the ground. And in fact, I've got a picture there right here. This was a picture that I took. This is the way we went down into the pit.
it was the antenna.
Yeah, and as this came down, this is stuck in the ground. It's about 50 feet into the ground. What you see hanging on it now, the flag, the first firefighter that we found there, this is what he had. These are his suspenders and trousers that were put up there as a memorial, and then we put a flag at half-mast and duct taped it on. But this was the center area. I mean, this is huge. It looks small in the photo, but it's a huge sculpture. It's now, I believe, in Battery Park, if I'm not mistaken. And this was the path that we went down. They just bobcatted through, and we would go down about 300 feet down into the ground.
That's what you called the pit, right?
That's what we call the pit. We did it respectfully. I mean, not to be disrespectful, but it was. And as you would walk down,
Because it was rather deep, right?
Oh, 350 feet down we went. Yeah, it went down very deep. And as you went down the path, the ground was still burning underneath. There were still fires raging underground. And as that would happen, the ground would split. So you could walk down this path and, 12, 14 feet away, all of a sudden the ground would split and you'd get, 20, 30 feet of flame shooting up in the air when the oxygen would hit it. So it was a pretty scary place to go. But you went. I mean, that's what we did. That's where we held services down there also. We had 3 services a day for those that wanted to receive communion. And that's where we went for the recovery. So it was a pretty intense area.
Yeah, you told me a little story about a couple of utility workers that went down in there.
Yeah, that was amazing. Matt and John, they worked for a utility company, and they had a very specialized job. Their job was to go in if there was ever a massive disaster such as this, and go down where the main lines were, where the shut-off valves were, and shut off the lines for the gas and so forth. And to do that in this particular case, they literally had to rappel down on ropes, the 2 of them, probably about 100 feet to 120 feet down to get to the shut-off area because everything had collapsed. There were no staircases to get to it. So the 2 of them rappelled down, and I was there at the time. And when they got down, they literally were balancing on a steel I-beam. They were standing on this I-beam. Below them was water that had seeped in from the barrier wall that held back the Hudson River, which had meanwhile cracked from the impact of the buildings. And water had come in. So with the water coming in, with the fires underground still raging, the water was literally almost at a rolling boil below them. So here the two of them are standing on an I-beam getting off the rope with water below that if they fell into it, they knew they'd be lost. And the ropes caught fire and burned back up again. So they had to stand there for pretty close to, it seemed like forever, but probably 15 to 20 minutes. And then more workers were able to come in, get new lines down to them and get them out of there. And as they came out, I walked up to them and introduced myself. And I said, I told them how amazing it was what they'd just done. And I said, do you mind if I take your picture? And they looked at me and they said, not looking like this. And I said, what? And they said,
Got an image.
Yeah, look at us. We're filthy. My shirt's burned. And then he said, let's go change. So they went back in the trailer that they had there, and they put on nice clean T-shirts and new flags on their helmets. And I have a picture of that in the book also.
Yeah, you have several pictures in the book.
Now, there's quite a few in there. There's about 53 photos. And all of the photos, I sent them in for copyright when I was done so that they would be protected. It took a long, long time. Normally it's about 3 months to hear back from Washington. And I finally got a call in about 9 months from the National Archives, the director of the National Archives. And she called me and said, "This Mr. Kadow?" And I said, "Yes." She said, "You submitted pictures from 9/11 trade." I said, "I did." And I said, "I've been waiting." She said, "Well, we have them here." She said, "The reason you're waiting is they've been in committee for review." And she said, "We'd like to know if we could use these photos for a world tour exhibit we're putting together for the Smithsonian." And I gave them permission to do that, and that's what they ended up doing with them. And of course, I placed them in my book also.
Well, we have a lot more to chat about.
We do.
Unfortunately, we're going to have to end this episode. But stay tuned next week, and we'll continue this conversation. Till then, to all our military and their families, our veterans, and all those people up there who are part of this rescue effort, and the families, we salute you.
Amen.
Let us know what you want us to present in our future programs. Please call Lakefront TV at 352-728-9707 with your programming ideas and suggestions.